the Mongol who chose Islam over the Mongols. Their own blood. What if I told you that one of the most feared empires in history, an empire that burned cities to the ground and shattered civilizations, was stopped not by a bigger army, but by a man's belief? This is the story of Berke Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, ruler of the Golden Horde, and the first Mongol leader to convert to Islam. And believe it or not, this man's faith might be the reason the city of Jerusalem still stands today. Who was Berke Khan? Berke Khan was born into Mongol royalty. His grandfather? None other than Genghis Khan himself, the legendary warlord who reshaped the world map. Berke was the son of Jochi, Genghis Khan's eldest child, and Sultan Khatun, a Muslim princess from the Khwarezmian Empire. So while he was raised in the fierce warrior traditions of the steppe, Islam was never far from his life. Through his mother's roots, Muslim scholars, merchants, and mystics had a way into his world from an early age. By the time Berke took control of the Golden Horde around 1257, after the death of his brother Batu Khan, he wasn't just a warrior. He was a man transformed by faith. The Golden Horde, a force to be reckoned with. Now, to understand Berke's power, you've got to picture the Golden Horde. It wasn't just a pocket of land. It stretched across what is now Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. Think forests, rivers, trade routes, and horsemen that could travel faster than messengers. This was one of the most dominant Mongol Khanates, rich in resources, strategically vital, and militarily unmatched. But even with all that power, Berke was different. Where most Mongol rulers stuck to shamanism or Buddhist influences, Berke made a radical move. A faithful turn. Why Berke became Muslim. Around 1252, even before becoming Khan, Berke converted to Islam. It wasn't a political stunt. It wasn't forced. According to some sources, Berke was deeply moved by the teachings of Islam, especially the Sufi mystics who preached humility, justice, and spiritual discipline. And in a brutal world where empires were built on fear, maybe faith offered something deeper, meaning. Most Mongols tolerated religion. They didn't care if you were Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, or animist, as long as you paid tribute. But Berke's choice was different. He didn't just allow Islam. He lived it. He prayed. He fasted. He reportedly avoided pork and alcohol, two things the Mongol elite didn't usually skip. And slowly, Islam wasn't just part of the Golden Horde's population, it became its identity. A rift begins, Hulagu Khan and the coming storm. But while Berke was building a Muslim legacy in the north, his cousin Hulagu Khan was doing the opposite in the south. Hulagu led the Ilkhanate, a Mongol state based in Persia, and in 1258, he launched one of the most catastrophic campaigns in Islamic history, the sack of Baghdad. And to understand why that moment enraged Berke Khan so deeply, you need to understand what Baghdad meant to the world. Baghdad wasn't just a capital city. It was the beating heart of the Islamic Caliphate and the center of the Islamic Golden Age. This was a city where science, philosophy, medicine, astronomy, and literature flourished. Scholars from all over the known world came to Baghdad to study, debate, and exchange knowledge. At the center of it all was the House of Wisdom, a massive library and research institution that held thousands upon thousands of books, scrolls, and manuscripts. It was home to translations of Greek philosophy, groundbreaking medical texts, and astronomical charts that were ahead of their time. When Hulagu's army stormed Baghdad in 1258, they didn't just kill people. They erased a civilization's memory. It's said that the Tigris River ran black with ink and red with blood as the Mongols tossed entire libraries into the water and executed scholars without hesitation. Historians believe the destruction of Baghdad in 1258 set back human progress by hundreds of years. Knowledge that could have fueled revolutions in science and philosophy was lost forever. For Berke, a newly devout Muslim, this wasn't just war, it was a cultural genocide. And the man responsible was his cousin. He was furious. He's said to have declared, "Hulagu has destroyed the caliphate, and I will not rest until I avenge this insult to Islam." Faith versus blood. The war brews. But this wasn't just a religious conflict. Hulagu had claimed parts of Azerbaijan, land Berke saw as rightfully his. So now the lines were drawn. It was no longer cousin versus cousin. It was faith versus blood. And Berke made his choice.
Berke Khan had made his choice. In a world where Mongol loyalty ran thicker than blood, he broke with tradition and turned against his own cousin, not for power, not for land, but for faith. And what followed was one of the most significant civil wars in Mongol history. A war that would not only tear the empire apart, but also change the fate of Jerusalem. After the sack of Baghdad, Berke Khan couldn't sit back. He began rallying his forces from the north. Hulagu, still drunk with power after flattening the Islamic world's greatest city, underestimated him. But Berke wasn't alone. He had a secret weapon, General Nogai, one of the most skilled commanders in the Mongol world, a warrior with both brains and brutality. Together, they plotted an ambush. In 1262, the war erupted. The clash between Berke's Golden Horde and Hulagu's Ilkhanate was unlike anything the Mongol Empire had seen. For the first time in history, two grandsons of Genghis Khan went to war against each other. And here's what makes it even more shocking. Genghis Khan had created a law, part of the Yasa, that strictly forbade war between members of the royal bloodline. No Mongol ruler was supposed to spill the blood of another descendant of Genghis Khan. It was meant to keep the empire united, to stop infighting before it ever began. Berke didn't just ignore this rule, he shattered it, because for him, faith came before family. The blood of his cousin wasn't more sacred than the blood spilled in Baghdad. At the Battle of the Terek River in 1262, Berke struck. Nogai's forces ambushed Hulagu's army near the Caucasus Mountains. The result? A devastating defeat for the Ilkhanate. Hulagu's forces were crushed. He was forced into retreat, humiliated. This wasn't just a tactical win, it was a message to the world. Berke Khan would defend Islam, even if it meant breaking the very law that bound the Mongol world together. And here's where the story becomes legendary. While Berke and Hulagu were tearing into each other in the north, the Mamluks, Muslim warriors of Egypt, were preparing for something big in the south. After the fall of Baghdad, Hulagu had set his eyes on the Holy Land. He wanted Jerusalem. But thanks to Berke, he never got the chance. Berke's war drained Hulagu's strength. His troops were stuck in the Caucasus. His resources were stretched thin. And just when he needed to turn south, Berke kept the pressure on. But Berke didn't just hold Hulagu back. He helped the Mamluks win. He sent intelligence. He granted them safe passage through his lands. He gave them the breathing room to prepare. Then, in 1260, at the Battle of Ain Jalut, the Mamluks did the unthinkable. They defeated a Mongol army, the first major defeat in Mongol history. This battle stopped the Mongol advance into Palestine called. If Berke hadn't launched his war, Hulagu could have sent reinforcements. Jerusalem would have fallen. Mecca might have been next. Berke Khan didn't ride into Jerusalem with a sword, but he saved it all the same. Berke Khan died in 1266 or 1267 while still deep in campaign against the Ilkhanate. He was buried in Sarai, the capital of the Golden Horde, with full Islamic honors. But his legacy didn't die with him. His successor, Mengu Timur, continued his Islamic policies. Over time, the Golden Horde became a deeply Muslim state. Arabic became the language of its coins. Mosques rose across the steppe. Islam was no longer the faith of the conquered, it was the faith of the rulers. And politically, Berke's defiance shattered the illusion of a united Mongol empire. The bloodline of Genghis Khan had split. The empire would never be whole again. Let's zoom out for a second. Berke's choice to follow Islam accelerated the Islamicization of Central Asia and Russia, preserved sacred cities like Jerusalem, Mecca, and Medina, helped end the Mongol era of unchallenged domination, and proved that personal conviction could rival even the might of a Mongol war machine. Let's end with a few details that make this story even more unbelievable. His name, Berke, means strong or unyielding in Mongolian. You couldn't script it better. He was the first Mongol Khan to convert to Islam long before names like Ghazan Khan or Tamerlane followed his path. Under his reign, the Golden Horde began minting coins in Arabic, a powerful signal of the state's Islamic identity. And get this, Berke and Hulagu weren't just cousins, they were also in-laws. Hulagu had married Berke's sister, so this wasn't just a war, it was a full-on family feud that would decide the fate of the Muslim world. Some historians even argue that Berke's resistance helped preserve the Islamic world long enough for a new empire to rise just a few centuries later, an empire called the Ottomans. Berke Khan didn't conquer the most land, he didn't build the grandest palaces, but he left behind something far greater. He left a legacy of resistance, righteousness, and redemption. In a time of unimaginable brutality, he chose faith. In a family of conquerors, he chose justice. And in doing so, he saved Jerusalem, shook an empire, and rewrote what it meant to be Mongol. So next time someone mentions the Mongols, don't just think of destruction and terror. Remember the Khan who stood alone. Berke Khan, the man who chose faith over blood.